So today, we're going to be talking about establishing trust again. It said, with a God that sometimes we think, are you there? Now, there's a story of a man who came to two great rabbis and demanded, teach me the law of Moses while you stand on one foot. And the first rabbi said, yeah, quit messing with me and leave. And the second rabbi got on one foot and said, the law of Moses is about loving God and your neighbor. The rest is commentary. Guess what? Jesus said the same in Mark 12. Love God with all your heart, soul, and mind. Love your neighbor as yourself. Now, that seems simplistic, and we're sitting here going, wow, that's it. Then why are we spending all this time reading all these other books? You know, that's not that any of you ever used anything like the Cliff's Note versions for any class that you ever took, but that's it. But learning the ways of God requires work. Hearing, accepting, trusting God's Word. There's the intellect, but then as we go through difficult times, there's the emotion that we have to grapple with. And so we must trust, we must hope, we must love, and a lot of times that's hard. So, today we're talking about Ezekiel, and we've been going through the prophets, and the prophets are an interesting bunch. So let me sort of summarize these prophets and the majority of these books in a little step-by-step, Cliff's Note versions of it. The prophets basically go in this order: warning, woe, hope. There's warning. God's people are sinning. And they're warned, don't do this. Don't do this, or there will be punishment. And as parents, we face this, right? So my youngest was 4. She comes in the study. I'm working on something, and she reaches out for the blinds. And I said, Liesel, and she froze. Her hand's still here. I said, Liesel, do you remember what we talked about? How you can't grab the blinds? And remember, I told you, if you bend the blinds again, I'm going to have to punish you. Do you remember? Now, I don't want to, but I will. So what are you going to do? Okay. I mean, you just watch it coming, okay? And you're trying to keep from laughing, as you punish her because, I'm not supposed to be laughing about this. But I called my dad and I'm like, I was this way, wasn't I? He said, oh, you telegraphed it a mile away. I was like, what's wrong with you, boy? Come on. But there is that. And God's been doing the same thing with a lot of these prophets. Don't go there. And yet they go there. And we see the same thing. He's trying to achieve that balance that one rabbi pointed out in this. There's both the left and the right, the conservative and the liberal sides. And I'm not talking about politics here. I'm talking about religious. As we see throughout Scripture as well, there's the fact of we need to keep the rules. Okay? And there's some of us, got to focus on the rules, got to focus on the rules, got to focus on the rules. And yet, in one of the earlier prophets before Ezekiel, God states that you've kept all my rules. You're giving me proper offerings. But you know what? Your heart's not in the right place because you're giving me the proper offerings, but you're not helping the needy. You're not helping the poor. And that's just as important. And so that balancing act is always difficult, especially in American culture because we don't do balance. We do one extreme to another. Okay? Now, it's going to get worse, and I just tell you that, culturally. Because let's stop and think about it. Many of us here are parents. And before you became parents, you tend to have this attitude of just give everybody space, we'll get this. And want to give people second, third, fourth, fifth chances because, you wanted the second, third, fourth, fifth chances. And then you have kids. And you realize that's not what's best for them. But it's still, there's that time period you got to adapt to. When I was born, the book by Dr. Spock was the bit. You remember that one? He wrote that in the late 40s, 50s. And my mother was a nurse, and she idolized medicine, and so she read the book because it's a pediatrician. He must know what he's doing. And it said, talk to your children. Don't punish them. Talk. Talk to them. Help them understand. And she said, I talk to you. I talk to you. I talk to you. Then I took the book and wore out your fanny, and you were better. Okay? Now, my sister you could talk to. You could look at her angry. She'd burst into tears, never do it again. Me, once a month, I was like, yeah, let's see if the rules have changed. Oh, no, they haven't. Okay. But, as parents, we get there and we understand that. Because parenting teaches us, we got to keep things in balance. And again, we learn that because if all you do is punish, you don't get anywhere. If all you do is praise, you don't get anywhere. Okay? But the reason I'm telling you it's going to get worse is this past month, new data was released. And for the first time in human history, there are more women age 30 without children than there are with children. Okay? So that means it's going to be longer before people realize, oh no, balance, yeah, we need a little bit of both. Okay? But when we don't do it, when we don't respond, then there's woe, where God's going, I told you, and now the punishment has to come. And they will be conquered, the temple destroyed, they're taken into captivity. And now we're getting into hope. That even in the midst of all this, there was a reason for this, but there's still hope for the future. So, Ezekiel lived at the time that Jerusalem fell. This is about 586 BC. The destruction and exile had come after 2 deportations, like God was sitting there going, this is a taste. This is a taste. Okay. Now, the book of Ezekiel, as we're going to get into, has a lot of apocalyptic literature, a lot of wild imagery, just like Revelations. Chapter 17 begins with the famous story of the Valley of Dry Bones, an illustration of 2 sticks. And, for those of you who, grew up in certain circumstances, you always heard that phrase, you don't have 2 sticks to rub together. Well, guess where some of that came from? Now, both metaphors, though, talk about the restoration of Israel. Now, woe. You've been punished for a reason. We got drama teachers in this class. Many of you are in theater. So you'll like Ezekiel. Okay? Ezekiel was a thespian type. He was a guerrilla preacher. He'd run into a group of people, pull something off that would just go, what is that? And then run away so that people could just sit here and be talking about it. Okay? Before there was viral media, he was basically working viral media. Okay? Ezekiel 4, we hear the story of Ezekiel being told by God to build a model of Jerusalem. Like, right there, that should get your attention. I loved Legos as a kid. Did you like Legos? And I mean, today's kids, they got it. You can Legos of the Millennium Falcon. Yeah. Just 5,000 pieces. I mean, come on. You get that knocked out in a year or two. But he builds this model. He takes his sword, cuts his hair, puts it on there, chops it all up to illustrate to the people, this is what God's doing to Jerusalem. Now, there's one aspect of this too. God commands him to cook this model and to cook his food over human excrement. Yeah, not the type of things you really talk about in Bible class, right? But this is what God called him to do, okay? To give them the idea of this is how bad it's going to be, okay? And he doesn't quite like that. God, really? And so he discusses this with God, and he says, can I just do it over animal excrement? Some cow patties? Okay? For just a moment, I contemplated, I got plenty of those in the back pasture. But I didn't bring any with me, so don't worry about it. But God says, okay, you can use animal feces. Now, I'll just point this out because Ezekiel's told, okay, you can use animal feces. Being a prophet isn't necessarily fun. I mean, if you're chopping up a model of the city of Jerusalem and showing people this is what's about to happen, I'm going to be burning this over animal feces, which doesn't smell all that great. People aren't going to be gathering around going, let's go see what Ezekiel's doing. It's always a fun time. Okay? He's such an upbeat guy. I always feel uplifted by him. Okay? That's not going on. And yet, he's told to do this. Okay? And just, I could pointing out sin isn't fun. And people aren't going to like it. Just like you had to do with your kids. Remember those discussions you had? Like one of my girls came out of the room and I said, where are you going? To the mall. I said, not dressed like that. Oh, this outfit's cute. You call it cute. Guys call it something else. And we get in this big debate and she says, and I quote, you are ruining my life. And I said, good. And that shocked her. And I said, if you're 14 and I'm ruining your life, that's exactly where I need to be. Because I'm your dad, not your best friend. And so I got to tell you things you don't want to hear and make you do things you don't want to do. When you become an adult and realize I'm right, then we'll be friends. Until then, put on clothes. But guess what? When we point out sin, it's the same type deal. People don't want to hear it. People don't want to hear it. But remember, just like you're doing with your child, we do this because sin is sin and wrong is wrong. But we don't do this so that we can gloat in the judgment. We do it because that's what's best for them, so that they can know. And remember that. In Ezekiel 2:6, he is commanded, and you, son of man, do not be afraid of them, nor be afraid of their words, though briars and thorns are with you, and you dwell among scorpions. That's a great thought for a minister. Do not be afraid of their words or dismayed by their looks, because they are a rebellious house. Why is this so important? Because if they had not been warned, it would not have been right for God to hold them in judgment. It would not have been right for me to take a 4-year-old Liesel and punish her when she first grabbed the blinds before I'd even told her, you can't do that. Okay? And later on in this, in some of the image, like Ezekiel 33, it says that if anyone hears the trumpet, i.e. the preaching from the prophets, but does not take warning, and the sword comes and takes his life, his blood will be on his own head. And since he heard the sound of the trumpet but not take warning, his blood will be on his own head. If he had taken warning, he would have saved himself. And guess what? We've had a wonderful illustration of that this past week. Stockton Rush, the CEO of the Titan Submersible Company, their chief engineer 2 years ago told him, this won't work. So he got fired. He countersued. They settled out of court. All the technical experts from the Deep Submersible Society unanimously sent him a letter last year saying, this won't work. But he said, this is my truth. And he took 4 people with him. Steve Jobs. And the reason I point this out is these guys are billionaires, and billionaires tend to have what was referred to Steve Jobs as called the unreality field, where you don't accept reality, you convince people to do stuff, and they became billionaires because in many cases they were successful in that. But the catch is, after a while, they begin to believe their own hype. And when Steve Jobs was told he has cancer, his response to his specialists was not to get a pathology report. He said, I will fix this with fruit juice and juice cleanses. And then when that didn't work, he went back to his specialist and they said, it's too late. We told you had to start then. So you can be warned, and if you don't listen, it's on your head. So Ezekiel means God strengthens you, or strengthened by God. The same word was applied to Joshua when he was told, be strong in the Lord and lead the people. Ironically, it's the same word that's used with Pharaoh when it says God hardened Pharaoh's heart. The literal translation of it is really God strengthened Pharaoh's heart. The idea being that Pharaoh, if God hadn't given the strength, would have never stood up to God, which is what he really wanted to do, which points out that God will let us do what we want, even if it's not the right thing, because we do have free will. Now, Ezekiel's tough to cover in the details. I just need to let you know that. In Judaism, it is considered one of the most difficult books. And in fact, the first several chapters of Ezekiel, it talks about the image of God and what he is. And it was considered dangerous for the uninitiated. And so rabbis were instructed that you only discuss this with your top students and then only the outlines. But congratulations. You're now part of that elite group. So here we go. I looked and I saw a windstorm coming out of the north, an immense cloud with flashing lightning surrounded by a brilliant light. The center of the fire looked like glowing metal, and the fire was what looked like 4 living creatures. In appearance, their form was human, but each of them had 4 faces and 4 wings. Their legs were straight. Their feet were like those of a calf and gleamed like burnished bronze. And under their wings, on their 4 sides, they had human hands. And all 4 of them had faces and the wings of one touched the wings of another. And each one went straight ahead. They did not turn as they moved. Their faces looked like this. Each of the four had the face of a human being, and on the right side each had the face of a lion, and on the left side each had a face of an ox, and each also had the face of an eagle. And such were their faces, that each had 2 wings spreading out upward, each wing touching that of the creature on either side, and each had 2 other wings covering its body. Each one went straight ahead, and wherever the Spirit would go, they would go without turning as they went. And the appearance of the living creatures was like burning coals of fire or like torches. And fire moved back and forth among the creatures. It was bright, and lightning flashed out of it. The creatures sped back and forth like flashes of lightning. And as I looked at the living creatures, I saw a wheel on the ground beside each creature with its 4 faces. And this was the appearance and structure of the wheels. They sparkled like topaz, and all 4 looked alike. Each appeared to be made like a wheel intersecting a wheel. And as they moved, they would go in any one of the 4 directions the creatures faced. And the wheels did not change direction as the creatures went. Their rims were high and awesome, and all 4 rooms were full of eyes all around. And wherever the Spirit would go, they would go, and the wheels would rise along with him, because the spirit of the living creatures was in the wheels. And when the creatures moved, they also moved. And when the creatures stood still, they also stood still. And when the creatures rose from the ground, the wheels rose with them, because the spirit of the living creatures was in the wheels. Spread out above the heads of the living creatures was what looked something like a vault, sparkling like crystal and awesome. And under the vault their wings were stretched out towards one another, and each had 2 wings covering its body. Now, the first thing to understand is that we can understand this a lot better than people those days because of today's culture. Now, what are you talking about? Their rims were high and awesome. It's easy to spend money on rims, especially on 20-inch rims on my Impala, because I want to be a bala, shot college. Okay, I'm throwing this out to you so you can reference this to your children and grandchildren this afternoon, and you will have street cred, okay? This is a song by Little Troy, okay? But I point this out because literally there is a reason for this. And the other aspect of this, in verse 19, when the living creatures moved, the wheels beside them moved, and when the living creatures rose from the ground, the wheels also rose. This is a lifted 4x4. Now, we all have experience with lifted trucks around here. And why are all these trucks lifted so high? So they can go wherever they want, right? Even though, the ones that are chromed out are never going to get off-road. Do you know how much chrome costs? I mean, come on. But these lifted trucks are there so they can go off-roading and overcome obstacles. That's the key thing to understand. Ezekiel gets this glimpse of the glory of God. And we can't conceive God, so it's no surprise that we're reading this and it's like over the top and we're like, what is this? Because they're trying to take something that's unconceivable and get it down into some human understanding. But there are things that stand out that can give us the big ideas. Whoops. 4. 4 is a big theme. It is under Judaism. There's 4 creatures. They all have 4 heads. In the Jewish sense, 4 always represents the 4 points of the compass. It's the most all-encompassing phrases you can have. Basically, it covers everything. Okay? So they can see everywhere. They see everything. So God is all-seeing, all-knowing, unchanging. Because remember, they went straight. They did not move. They did not change. It also seems to be a big deal that they don't turn as they move. They're just going straight. They're covered in eyes. There's something about the fact of the glory of the Lord that it means nothing, absolutely nothing is going unseen. The difficulties we're having, God sees. And God will continue to move straight ahead with His plan, even when we don't see that. And this is the other key thing. This is why I'm saying the story jokes about the rims and the 4x4s are real, because God is moving the world. Everything in this illustration is everything was moving together. The creatures move together. Their wings are touching. Everything is synchronized. One of the big ideas seems to be wheels. Now, wheel technology hasn't changed much, although I've heard about, in a new improved wheel that Tesla's coming out with, the square wheel, but I don't think it's going anywhere. Oh, it's a tough crowd. Come on. That was a good dad joke. Come on. But the point is, wheels are there for a reason, to move. And why is that so important? He has a whole paragraph devoted to the movement of this glory of God. Every other illustration in Scripture, when people see God and try to explain it, there's no discussion of movement. So why here? God is with you. That's why. Now, these are the people in Judah. They've just been exiled. They've just been ripped out. And remember all the people of that time frame. They believed there are all these gods, but the gods were tied to physical locations. This is the god of Egypt. This is the god of Assyria. This is the god of... The plagues in Egypt were trying to show them, yeah, our God, no, he's everywhere. But even after that, where was the Spirit of the Lord? It was in the tabernacle, right? And then the temple. But the temple's just been destroyed. You're a Jew. The temple's toast. How can God be with us? But this idea of God moving was huge. This is what Ezekiel was trying to get across. Because a little bit later in his vision, go to Ezekiel 10. And if you read Ezekiel 10, Ezekiel's talking about the glory of the Lord moving. In which way does it move? East. Jerusalem was conquered. And the Assyrians moved them where? Woohoo, east. They shouldn't swear. That's right. Because west is just the Mediterranean, okay? They had to go east, okay? They went east. And the vision is God is moving east. The temple's destroyed, but God's going with you. And in fact, that was the big idea they were trying to get across. Yeah, the temple's destroyed. It doesn't matter to God. God is going with you. Okay? Now, why was such a big idea to them? Because that was hard for them to understand at the time point. But it's a big idea for us. When things are not going the way we planned. When we're at a stage of life and we're going, how did this happen? This wasn't supposed to happen. Is God with us? Yeah. He's still with us. What were these people feeling? The same thing we are? Does God care? Is He even real? Is He with us? Where did He go? And Ezekiel is suggesting to them, not only does God care about you, but He's here with you. Even in another country, even with the temple destroyed, He is here with you. Ezekiel is going to strengthen his people through at least a little bit of an explanation. Not exhausted, not comprehensive like we might like in today's society. Give us all the details so I know everything totally. Nope, that's not the way God works. But just enough an explanation so that when you read the prophecy of Ezekiel, and you get to 16 and 17, it's going to talk about the unfaithfulness of the people. And he's going to say, listen, you got carted off, but God went with you. You got punished for a reason, and here's why you're being disciplined, but God's still with you. And he offers just a little bit of poetic explanation, but he offers a bunch of assurance. By the time you get to the closing visions in Ezekiel, he talks about them being reinstated, Jerusalem being rebuilt, and the glory of God moves where? It comes from the east and it moves back west. Because he's given the assurance, God came with you. And He's going to take you back and He's going to go with you. Just like He led the Israelites out of Egypt. Because He never left them. And He never left us. Okay, so let's go in. God has not deserted you. He's not forsaken you. Our God, He has wheels. He has rims. He's got a jacked up 4x4 like you've never seen. And He goes where you go. And you don't have to doubt that. Just remember that the closing chapters of Ezekiel are not the physical rebuilding of the temple, just like the closing chapter of Revelation's not this. It's about God making everything new. Everything will be fixed one day when God comes again. Now, hope for the future. I need to compress this quickly. Ezekiel gave them strength, and it's the same strength we can learn. Do sometimes bad things happen to us? Yep. And sometimes that's because we made the mistakes. And there's things we can learn from it. And there's sometimes we haven't done anything wrong, We just need to persevere. Because guess what? The country of Judah, all the people were taken into captivity. Did every person in Israel sin? Nope. There were people that were still serving God and doing what was right, but they got carted off too. And the same thing happens with us. Ezekiel used the mind of an innovator, the creativity of an artist, and the imagination of a storyteller to communicate hope to the people of God. And we should do the same. We too must be creative. We too must be industrious. We must be determined and stubborn for God's ways and to figure out a way to reach other people. The very thing that made them and us a stiff-necked people, we can use that stubbornness if it's directed in the right direction. But we must endure. We must overcome. We must be strong. That's the key books of Ezekiel. Now, many of this age is brought up. We look back at our life and we're going, ugh, should have done that different. Oh, definitely should have not done that. Or we're looking at stages going, wait a minute, I haven't done anything wrong and I'm still having to deal with this. And those are real questions. Those are real feelings to be addressed. Okay? And it's okay to ask, like all these generations before us, is God there? Does He care? Is He really with me? Does He have a plan? Yep. Yes, He does. But just like the Israelites there, and many of you are teachers, I remind you of one thing. When teachers give a test, they're silent during the test. And when we're having to take the test, the same is true. Now, to give you hope in one other way, I'm going to give you one other thing. I'd like to wish all of you a happy Nusardo. And if you're going, what? As I told you before, I'm Persian, half Persian by nationality, but Assyrian, Ashuri, by ethnicity. Okay? Now, the Assyrians were the world's first empire. And yes, they gave the Israelites a hard time. Okay? But Jonah commanded to repent, and we did. For a little bit. Okay? And just like Lisa was a 4-year-old, we're like, what is that? And so we were punished by God. But in the first century, Thomas came to Assyria. And Assyria was the first nation to convert en masse to Christianity. And they've been persecuted in the Middle East for it ever since. Now, in my family, when we are leaving anywhere to go on a trip, you pour water on the people leaving. Not on their head, you pour it on the car. Okay? And I've done this my entire life. It's a blessing. It's like go as freely as the water flows. And I've been doing it for so long, it just never registers to me that nobody ever does this. And so like friends would come home from the college and we're leaving. And mom's waving, this 4'11" little lady, and she's watching it. And I'm backing out, and my friend's like, what's your mom doing? Oh no, look out! Ah! And water's being thrown at us, and he's like, what is going on? I'm like, oh, I should have told you. Now, the reason I point this out is coming up on July 23rd is Nusardal. And Nusardal is a yearly celebration, year-wide, that Assyrians have been doing since the first century. What is it? When Thomas came and we converted en masse, he had to do mass baptisms to convert everybody. And so Nusardal, we get together, we have a picnic, and then we have the world's largest water balloon water gun fight. You are throwing water over everybody to remind us of the fact that we were baptized and we converted and God's still with us. Now, I'd just like to point out something. We've been doing this since the first century. Let's see, what's happened to Assyria since then? Well, during the First World War, the Turks committed genocide against the Assyrians Armenians. That wasn't recognized by the U.S. government until 2021. Yet the Jews were not the only ones that had genocide committed against them. And I don't blame you for not knowing that, because if you, like me, had history in high school or junior high, it was taught by the football coach, and And I was on the football team, so don't get upset at me. But yeah, it didn't cover that. But yes, the Assyrians were the minority sect throughout the Middle East, the only Christian sect there. And so during the Iraq wars and everything else, we're the ones getting slaughtered. And yet, once a year, we still celebrate to remind ourselves God is still with us. So, I tell you that to say this: God is with you. And this afternoon, if you want to just relieve some stress and remind yourself of that, grab yourself some water balloons and go have some fun. Y'all have a good one. Take care.